Yes, you read it right. It's been 12 months already. So, was it worth having solar panels installed in the house? Stay tuned and we're going to find out. So, first of all, the disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing my opinions. So, if you are considering getting any of this stuff, please do get qualified advice first. The other thing to say is a massive thank you. 750 plus people have subscribed to the channel and plenty more likes and comments. I started producing this entire series because when I was researching, I struggled to find many people who were based in the UK sharing their thoughts on solar equipment and battery. Everybody I could find was kind of based in the States or based in Australia, and they get considerably more sunshine than us. So I started documenting my journey. Nobody's paying me. It is purely to help those of you out who are considering getting some of this stuff and want to know what it's like from somebody in the UK, or those of you who just want to follow along because you find it interesting. So thank you very much. YouTube does inform me though, only 10% of our viewers have subscribed. So if you are getting value out of my channel, please do consider subscribing. It helps me out massively, and I am trying to hit the 1,000 subscriber target by the end of the year if it's possible. Also, if you're considering switching energy provider to lock in a more preferential rate and you want to switch to Octopus, if you use the link that you see on the screen or call them and quote the reference number, they will give you and me both £50 off our next bill. So before I get into all the numbers, let's talk about the equipment, particularly for those of you who are new to the channel and haven't seen some of my earlier videos. I have Trina solar panels, 19 of them on my roof. I have 10 on the front elevation facing east, and I have 9 on the rear elevation facing west. My east facing array is at 126 degrees on the compass heading to be precise. I have microinverters in my system, so I have 19 Enphase IQ7 Plus microinverters, one behind every single panel, and they're all connected together and ultimately end up talking to the Enphase gateway, which reads all the metrics and submits it to the cloud so I can see nice charts on my app. My battery system is by Give Energy, so I have an AC inverter which converts AC electricity into DC, and then the DC power is stored in the batteries. When I originally got the system installed, I got an 8.2 kilowatt battery installed, and then later on I added a second battery, which is the 9.5 kilowatt battery. So in total, I have 17.7 kilowatts of battery power. We also got an electric car, an Audi Q4. So in order to make that work, we have got 2 Hypervolt EV chargers installed at home because we're expecting a second electric car as well. And I wanted to cash in on the grants. I got them both done at the same time. In addition to that, I installed a My Energy Eddy. This is a solar power diverter. What it does is stops you from diverting surplus electricity to the grid and diverts it to heat up your hot water first. And until that's done, it won't let it go to the grid. You can get it to divert to many things, not just hot water. It can do underfloor heating, towel rails, like electric heaters, many things, right? It all works in the same way, but I have it connected for the hot water. And finally, to complete the equation, I switched my energy provider from British Gas, who provides gas and electricity, to Octopus Energy for 2 reasons. One, all of the energy that Octopus provide is green. Second of all, they have an Octopus Go tariff. This is the cheap nighttime rate where I can purchase electricity on the cheap and or charge the car or charge the battery for what you'll see is approximately a quarter of the peak time price that I'm paying. This page is a schematic of all of that equipment and how it's laid out in my house. I am going to go through this very fast because it's very technical. I do have another video made earlier in the year where I go through this slowly, so if you do want to see the detail, please go back to that video. But basically, the solar panels are on the roof, the Enphase inverters are behind the solar panels. It all comes together in a junction box. There's an isolator. There are various CT clamps in the different brands. It goes to the Envoy, and then all of this electricity is pumped into my fuse board. I have multiple fuse boards in my house because there's different renovations happened at different times. You might think it's crazy, but everything's been done by an electrician and it's all signed off. So there's nothing to be worried about. That's one way electricity gets into my house. The second way electricity gets into the house is the traditional way, which is that it comes from the grid. So here's the grid. I have a 100 amp cutout fuse, I have a smart meter, more CT clamps monitoring what we are importing or exporting to the grid. Because I have multiple fuse boxes, we have a Henley block, which is the thing which splits your single supply into kind of multiple wires so it can go into separate fuse boxes. And then these fuse boxes power different parts of the house. So my secondary fuse box is where all of this equipment relating to solar and EVs is connected into. And then the original fuse box, the main one here, is where all the traditional stuff that you find in the house is wired up into that. The things to note of significance, if I go back to the top, the battery system is connected into this sub-main box. So there's a CT clamp, there's an isolator, there's a meter, there is an AC inverter, and then there's a fuse which is built into the first battery, and then the first battery is connected to the second battery. They're daisy chained, and it's on purpose like that. That is how Give Energy tells you need to set it up. Also from the sub-main, I have two wires which go out to the front of the house, one for each of the two different hypervolt chargers, and then you can connect the car to whichever one you want. Then coming back to the main consumer unit, like I say, the bulk of our house is connected to that. For the purpose of this schematic, the things of relevance are my internet is connected to this main router. To my internet router, I have a My Energy hub connected. This thing talks wirelessly to all the other My Energy equipment in my ecosystem. I also have a Harvey, which is connected via a CT clamp by my meter, and this enables the CT readings to be wirelessly transmitted to the hub and to the eddy. The reason I have this is because I do not have the ability to physically run a wire between this CT clamp and the eddy. If you can in your setup, you don't need the hub and you don't need the Harvey. The additional thing is, if you have an eddy which is manufactured, I think, like Q4 2022 or onwards, then the hub is built into the eddy. They've improved the system, so you no longer need a separate hub like I do. But because I bought mine earlier in the year, this is the setup. So also connected to my main consumer unit is a fuse, which then fuses the eddy, which is the solar power diverter. The eddy has two outputs, which I've fused, and this goes into the immersion heaters in two separate water tanks that I've got. Now you could have one immersion heater and one towel rail. You could have two immersion heaters, but both of them are in one water tank. Like I said, the eddy's got multiple outputs and it works with all of these things, right? I'm not going to go into it. Have a look at my separate video relating to the eddy. Very fast, this is the ecosystem that I've got. Of course, there's more things in my house which are consuming electricity, but they're not relevant to this, so I haven't added the detail onto this page. They are represented by these two house icons. All right, let's get into some numbers then. This is the stuff you're waiting for. So the long and the short of it is all these solar panels produced 6 megawatts worth of electricity in exactly a 12-month period. 6 megawatts, which is 6,000 kilowatts. Okay. Now, we didn't consume all of that. We exported 339 kilowatts to the grid. Because our battery's full, because we're optimizing our system, whatever the reason was, 339 went back to the grid. We also consumed from the grid, we imported 3.1 megawatts, and I'll explain why in a bit. So overall, our house consumed 8.8 megawatts when everything shakes out in the year. Now, let me give you some more numbers. We produced 6,000 kilowatts, the 6 megawatts, but my installer said the whole system would only produce 4,916. That's what his forecast was. We've actually produced, therefore, 22% more than my installer thought we would. That's the key number. Now let's talk about solar power that we generated, the portion that we consumed. So 6 megawatts minus the 339 kilowatts leaves you with 5,661 kilowatts of solar production that we actually consumed into the house. The installer said we would only consume 2,485 kilowatts of what we produce. So they thought we'd use 2,485. We actually consumed 5,661. We've beaten their estimate by 130%. 130%. Why is this important? It means when you get an estimate from your installer and it says it will take you 20 years to pay this back, it's probably nonsense, because my numbers tell me that I'm going to pay it back in less than half the time. And that's why the two numbers I've given you is significant. We've produced 22% more than they thought we would. We've consumed 130% more than they thought we would. So their estimate of an 18-year payback that they gave me is way too high. Across the year, it means that we are 66% energy independent. 66% of all of the electricity that we used was free. It came from sunshine. The remainder obviously came from the grid. Let me talk about the second chart here. This is the same numbers broken down across the year. The blue segments on this chart represent what we produced. The orange segments represent what we consumed. And the grey segments represent what went to and from the grid. So above the line, the grey segments represent purchase of electricity from the grid. Below the line, these little segments of electricity here represent what we sold or sent back to the grid. So you can see we're always trickling something back. But then in July, we got a second battery. So now we are storing more of our surplus versus giving it back. So I've managed to optimize the system. Looking at my solar panels, these are the 19 solar panels that I've got. And you can see how each individual solar panel has contributed to the entire equation. So the front of my house, the east facing or the slightly southeast facing array is making the biggest contribution. Each panel across the 12-month period has done about 390-ish kilowatts of production. The back of my house, which faces west-northwest, not really the right direction, is still making a contribution, right? There's one or two panels here which are darker in shade and have got a significantly lower number, and they are affected by shading from a neighbouring house, which is why the numbers are significantly different. But overall, the sum of all these numbers adds up to the 6 megawatts that we've produced in a 12-month period. And finally, from the Give Energy system, it says that 2,135 kilowatts have gone in and out of the battery. So this is all the surplus solar that we're generating, that we're storing during the day, or this is the electricity that we're buying from the grid at night time on the cheap on the Octopus Go tariff and managing to store it. So this is how much the battery is contributing to our entire system and helping to manage cost, basically. All right, so if you're finding this helpful, please do consider liking and subscribing, leave a comment, all that kind of good stuff. It really helps me out and I would appreciate it. But let's get into some more numbers, right? The juicy stuff. So first of all, let's talk in kilowatts. You might have noticed this chart from my other videos where I talk about my monthly updates. The message that I'm trying to give you here is how much electricity am I purchasing from the grid versus what I did the year before when I didn't have any of this equipment. So November 2020 to October 2021, when I didn't have any solar equipment, everything came from the grid. We purchased 4,789 kilowatts of electricity. 4,789. November 21 to October 2022. So this is the first year of having all of the equipment. We purchased 3,181 kilowatts from the grid. That is a reduction of 34%. Now you might be thinking, I just told you we're 66% energy independent, so how come our electricity consumption has only gone down by 34%? The reason is we got an electric car, which is new electricity demand on the house that we never had before, which is driving the numbers up. Okay? All right, moving on. If I talk about the same thing but for gas. So, November 2020 to October 2021, we used 39,081 kilowatts of gas. November 21 to October 2022, we used 30,257 kilowatts of gas. That is a reduction of 25%. Now you might be thinking, how have we done that? Because solar panels produce electricity, not gas. Very true. So 2.67% of this saving, of the 25%, was because of the eddy, because we were able to use free electricity to heat our hot water rather than purchasing gas. The remainder of the reduction is actually because we've had a particularly warm year this year, and therefore the heating's been on less and we've consumed less gas. That's the answer. So we have saved 25% in terms of our gas consumption. The eddy contributed 2.67% of that. The remainder came from just being a particularly warm year. Let's move on. Let's talk about some numbers. Let's talk about money, right? How much money have I saved? So here's the money chart. Now, we have two supplies of everything in our house, or we did. So the darker blue shaded segments represent our incoming electricity supply for the main portion of our house. The lighter blue represents the electricity supply for the second portion of our house. And you'll see in November last year, I combined them into one. That's why we no longer have a light blue section. Our gas supplies remain as two separate supplies. So we have a dark red, which is the main portion of the house, and a lighter red, which is the other part of our house. The yellow segment represents the money that we've saved. If we didn't have any of this equipment, we would be spending that money. And the green segments below the zero line represent rebates that we have got. So the £50 represents a rebate from recommending somebody to Octopus Go. And in October, £66 of that 116 is the rebate from the government because they're giving us some money to help reduce bills. But this is what it all translates to in monetary value. So let's do some year-on-year comparisons similar to before. So if you add up all these numbers, November 2020 to October 2021, all of the energy, gas and electric, that we purchased from the grid cost us £2,415. This includes all of our service charges and all of that kind of daily standing charges, all of that kind of stuff. £2,415, including VAT. November 2021 to October 2022, if you add up all the blue and the red, we spent £2,708. Now you might be thinking, hang on a minute, that's £300 more year on year. That's correct. All of the energy has cost us £300 more. But how can that be? We've just saved 34% of electricity and 25% on gas consumption. How on earth have we ended up spending £300 more? Well, the cost of electricity and gas has gone up such that net we end up spending £300 more. Year on year, the cost of electricity is more than double. And year on year, the cost of gas is, I think, at least 3, maybe even 4 times what it used to be. Again, look through one of my earlier videos where I've given you a breakdown of all of this if you want to see it in more detail, but that's roughly what the numbers are. So despite having saved all of this energy consumption, because of the price rises, we've actually spent more money. But what would we have been spending if we didn't have any of this equipment? Well, you take the £2,708 that we did spend, and you add on all the numbers that you see in those yellow bars. The grand total actually becomes £4,301. So the last 12 months, all of these crazy energy price rises have meant that we would have otherwise spent £4,301 to purchase all of this energy that we've consumed. Having solar panels has saved us £1,594 worth of electricity that we would have otherwise bought from the grid that we actually generated for free. And that number doesn't include the money that we've saved by having an electric car and all the other stuff that's going on. This is purely solar panels offsetting electricity that we would have otherwise needed to purchase from the grid. £1,594 saved. If we didn't, you would have to include the yellow segments on this chart in the equation, and you get to a grand total of £4,301 for the last 12 months period, compared to the year before, which is £2,415. Let's move on. Some more numbers. You'll have seen all of this before, but what I want to highlight is if you follow my mouse, the £1,594 I mentioned is over here. That's our solar savings. We've also saved £57 by not purchasing gas because of the eddy diverting electricity. I've saved £1,126 by not buying diesel because we now have an electric car and the electricity is free or it's cheaper. We have been paid £4.74 for selling lots of electricity back to the grid. That's how piddly it is. We've also saved £150 by being able to use the Octopus Go tariff to charge our car or charge our battery on the cheap rate versus paying peak time rate. It has cost me £110 to charge the EV, so occasionally I have to pay for the electricity at home because I need to charge a car and I'm going somewhere and I haven't got enough free sunshine. Or I've had to use a public charging point to charge up the car because there's not enough sunshine. So if I deduct 110 from the 1126, I've still saved over £1,000 worth of diesel just by switching from that car to the electric car. And you might think, well, there's a cost for the electric car. That's true. But I've leased the car, so I haven't got a cost. Or I pay a monthly premium anyway, which is equal to the depreciation. Second of all, I change my car every few years anyway. So whether I got another diesel or I got a petrol or I got whatever car, and the fact that I got an EV is irrelevant to me because I would have been spending the money on an upgrade to my car regardless. So that's why that number's not here in the equation. The bottom line is, I've saved £2,672 in 12 months from all of this stuff. That equates to 12% of what it cost me. So it cost me £21,616 to get all of this equipment installed. Now, you're probably falling off your chair. That is a lot of money, I know, but we use a lot of electricity in our house. So I had to get lots of solar panels to try and offset that. I have a roof which faces east and west. I don't own the south-facing elevation. Therefore, I couldn't put panels there, so I had to buy more panels because not all of them are working and pointing in the right direction. So it's cost me more. Then I have a roof which is affected by shading. So instead of getting the cheapest inverter, I had to get a more expensive microinverter system, which can optimize each panel and make the most out of the whole thing. I decided to get a second battery installed. I've got massive battery capacity, which is an increase in my capital expenditure, but I think it's going to increase the rate of payback. And it appears to be doing so. If you follow the last few months' videos, you'll see, and you can see it on this chart, the forecasted payback period, despite having added on another £3,500 for another battery in July, I'm still reducing my forecasted payback period. So it is working. So yes, I've dropped a lot of money. I do realise that. I do appreciate that not all of you might have this kind of cash, spare to drop on this. But if you did, in my view, it's a good investment. So at the moment, to break even, I'm forecasting to get there in about 8.5 years' time. My installer told me it would take me 18 years. But hopefully you understand from some of the numbers I've shared today why I'm forecasting to get there quicker. Because we are producing more solar power than the installer thought. I am using more of the solar power than the installer thought. And we also threw an electric car in the equation, and the amount of money that we save versus buying diesel is enormous, and it's helping to take massive chunks out of the payback. Switching to Octopus Go means I'm paying a quarter of the price for electricity. So I'm saving massive amounts for every unit that I end up purchasing from the grid, just by having a battery. Okay, let's move on. Let me summarize, right? Was it a good idea? Was it a good investment to get solar power? Yes. I got lucky. I ordered it last summer. I got my price locked in. I beat the rush, and I beat the massive price rises that I know some of you are experiencing now. For those of you who are financially savvy, the return on investment after 1 year is 12.36%. If you put your 21 grand in a savings account, your bank will give you point something percent interest. That £21,000 might make you about £20 at the end of the year. Instead, by investing into solar panels, I have so far saved £2,600. Right? I'm sure those of you who understand a 12.6% return is a very good ROI. If you put your money in stocks and shares, that's a good return. If you put it into some sort of fund or a bond, this is a better return. If you put it into property, this is good competition in terms of the return. Okay? Definitely better than the bank. Let's talk about some of the positives. So the thing in my mind out of all of this which stands out is Enphase. I know they are a more expensive system, but you pay for what you get for. It has just worked. Not once in the entire 12-month period has it ever tripped up. Have I had to reset anything? Nothing. A lot of the metrics that you've seen today and a lot of the metrics I share in other videos, the data comes from Enphase. That's how I calculate a lot of it. Okay, so they stand out in my mind out of all of this to be flawless. My installer's words, Enphase is the Rolls-Royce of inverter systems, and after a year I have to agree with him. The other positive, a full charge of my electric car is 82 kilowatts. That gets me about 300 miles of driving. Most of the year, it's been free to charge a car because I have so much sunshine on my roof that I can't use it up. So I stick it in the car and I've been driving around for free. At most, if I have to charge the car now, I'll charge it overnight on the electricity tariff. And if my car was empty and I had to do a full charge, it would only cost me £6 worth of electricity. Now, the average car in the UK used to get about 300 miles of range on a full tank of fuel. So if you have a petrol car and you're driving around it, you probably get about 300 miles, maybe a bit more, out of a tank of fuel. But how much does a tank of fuel cost you? 70, 80, maybe £90 now? I've charged my car for free for most of this year, and I'm only paying £6 now to charge it in the winter months. That is how much having an EV car in the equation is managing to save me. Then, having a battery in the equation has been a game changer. You're right, all the myths from years ago, solar panels are not worth it, it will take you like 20, 25 years to pay back the whole system, it's just not worth it. They were true. You can see from my installer's estimate, he thinks it's going to take 18 years to pay this back. But you can see from my calculations, it's going to take 8. And why? Because of the battery. Now, sun shines during the day. Most people are not at home during the day and they go to work. So your house is using relatively little electricity. In the evenings, when you're back home, when it's gone dark, that's when you're using more electricity. Turning on the kettle, running the washing machine, turning on the cooker, having all the lights on. That uses electricity. But there's no sunshine. So all the solar power that's produced during the day, it meets your demand during the day, but the rest of it just goes back to the grid for free. But if you have a battery, you can store all of that sunshine, and then you can discharge the battery when it's dark. So running the oven and running the kettle and running your lights in the evening becomes free, rather than pulling power from the grid. So, for those of you who keep hearing these myths, it's the battery in the equation which is making the game change and making this whole thing worthwhile and reducing that break-even point from something like 20 years to less than 10 years. And in many people's case, they can break even in like 6 or 7 years, right? If you have the most perfect house with a south-facing array, no shading, and you don't use that much electricity, all those kind of things, you can pay back much quicker than me. Let me talk about some negatives. So you'll see from those earlier slides that I have a lot of different brands in the ecosystem. And the integration between these brands is a bit of a challenge. They don't talk to each other very well, or at all. And it means managing the system, I end up having 5 or 6 apps on my phone, and occasionally when I want it to do certain things, I have to go into one app, press one button, go into a different app and press another button. If all of these things were in the same brand, they would all just work together. The problem is, there is no single brand out there which does everything today. Some brands do several of the things, but not everything. So we're still stuck. Things are improving. Brands like Give Energy are, they've introduced a battery, they've introduced an EV charger, they've now introduced smart plugs. So they're slowly getting more smart things in their ecosystem. But they're not there yet. Okay, my second negative is actually Give Energy. So as well as the batteries are good, they were the most value for money compared to other brands. I did consider Enphase when I bought them, but Enphase didn't sell batteries in the UK when I got this whole equipment. So I went with Give Energy as a British company, a new start, all of those kind of things. The problem is there's always something. So for a few months earlier in the year, the battery's fuse kept tripping. And Give Energy give you no information about why this happened, no notification that your fuse is tripped. Sometimes it takes me 3 or 4 days before I notice that it's tripped and the battery's not been working. And I couldn't figure out why. Eventually I got annoyed and I phoned them up a few times and said, look, this keeps happening, what's going on? And I managed to speak to the right guy, and he told me in his experience, this problem It's because I've got a loose connection somewhere. As soon as he told me that, I opened up everything, I found the loose connection, I tightened it up, and it's never happened again. So that's not Give Energy's fault, that's my installer's fault, but Give Energy could do a better job with their notifications and telling me what's going on and that my battery's not been working, hello, like you might want to go and check on it. The other thing is, right now, my Give Energy app tells me I might have 20% battery power left, but in reality it's zero. All of a sudden the battery goes to zero and then I'm pulling power from the grid. It's not because I'm not using the battery and I'm not getting the power in it. It's a calculation metric problem in their app. They are working on it, but it's just a bug and it's annoying. If I basically add up the whole year, it's the Give Energy system that I've had to pay more attention to, tinker with, keep changing settings to get it to do what I want, whereas the Enphase system just works. And finally, the last negative I'll say is the installers. So my installer wasn't the best. I had to ask a lot of questions, pay attention to a lot of detail. I caught him out on quite a few things which didn't make sense to really get the best price. He came along and just wanted to install like a bog standard basic system in my house. And I was like, no. We use a lot of electricity. The objective here is to try and maximize our solar power. I want more. I want a bigger system. I want a smarter system. You know, the system I showed you, I basically chose the majority of the things and put it all together and told him this is what I want. Go do it for me. The quality of advice that he was giving me wasn't better than what I managed to figure out from doing my own research. Now, I'm not saying all installers are like that, but that was my experience. The second thing is, particularly now, with the prices of everything going up, there seems to be too many cowboy installers out there who are not giving you quality advice. You know, I appreciate not all of you will have the energy or can understand some of the technicalities to do the kind of research that I've ended up doing. You depend on the installer just to tell you what's right. Well, many of them are motivated by just get it done, keep it simple. Not necessarily you actually might need a more complicated system in your setup to do what you're asking it to do. So that's a bit disappointing. I have friends and family who have got equipment and they have run into installers. Some of them approached my installer, some went to different installers, but had the same experience, that the quality of advice they're giving is not right. And as soon as they relay to me what the installer said, I can tell them that's a load of rubbish because my system, I've got all the data which will prove it otherwise. The second thing is there's quite a lot of installers milking it at the moment because they can charge you a fortune given that this equipment is in short supply. And that's not very fair. It's not right. And it's definitely the experience that I ran into when I was getting my second battery installed in July of this year. My original installer wanted to overcharge me by about £1,000 to £2,000. I knew what the cost of the battery was because I can buy it myself, and I know it's about 2 hours of labour to do the work. So it didn't add up. So I went to a different Give Energy installer who's local to me, and I got the same experience. He wanted to overcharge me on the cost of the battery by £1,000, and then he wanted to charge me a whole day's labour rate to do 2 hours work, which isn't right. So I found a different installer. He was willing to get Give Energy certified, and he charged me a fair price to do the electrical work based on his day rate. So unfortunately, the negatives is the installers out there. I'm sure there are good ones, but it appears to be that there are more bad ones who are a bit cowboy, wanting to do a quick job, take your money, keep it simple, make their lives easy, but not necessarily do the right thing for you. So anyway, do I recommend it? The long and the short is yes. It's a good investment, 12% return versus what you'll get in the bank. If you're motivated by going green, then I've got to 66% energy independence, where I don't rely on the grid for that much of my energy. And of course, that means it shields me from crazy things happening in the world, which are forcing the cost of energy up. Now, come back to the cost. I do know it's expensive. I know it's probably going to be it is more expensive than what I ended up paying if you're getting it today. Now, if you can't afford it, what do? Well, you could get solar panels and get a battery later. Or you could get the battery first and get the solar panels later. Right? That reduces your cost. I mean, you might be able to get finance, but that's a whole separate thing. Get a financial advisor to talk about that. But if you decide that you can only afford to get one, which one should you get? My answer is get the battery first. The battery will work for you 365 days a year. You can purchase electricity on the cheap tariff overnight and use it when electricity is expensive during the day. And if you're on the Octopus Go tariff, similar to me, you're paying a quarter of the price you would otherwise pay for electricity. It's a no-brainer. Simple as that. Other people have done a quick calculation by only adding a battery into your system on, it fluctuates depending on your usage, but most people break even around 3 to 4 years, something like that. Depending which brand you buy, it can fluctuate. If you get only solar panels, well, first of all, the sun only shines during the day when majority of people don't use much electricity. So it's only going to have a limited impact in the amount of money it saves you. All the surplus solar just goes back to the grid because you don't have a battery, so you can't store it. And then at night time or in the hours of darkness when you're consuming electricity, you're purchasing it at peak rate from the grid. So basically, the solar panels are only working for you for a portion of the day, whereas the battery can work for you 24 hours a day. It's as simple as that, right? And if you kind of rewind the video, listen to some of the other things I've said, look at the metrics I've shared in this video and the other videos, that will make more and more and more sense to you. Now, of course, if you get one of those items with the view that you're going to get the other one later on when you can afford it, make sure you tell your installer this. They should therefore recommend brands to you, which will then enable you to be integrated, which will work together well. When they come and do your installation, they will make sure the equipment that goes in kind of has provision for this additional equipment coming at a later date, so you don't end up having to redo some of your electrical work. Okay? So that's my advice. That's the long and the short of it. Right, so that's the end of it. Please do like, subscribe, comment. As I said, I produce these videos for free. No one's paying me. I decided to create them because I struggled to find good information when I was trying to research a system. So I'm doing this to help all of those of you in the UK who are interested in getting solar and wanted some data, wanted some information, some viewpoints, some comparisons. Of course, those of you in the rest of the world, you're welcome to listen to it as well. And those of you who are not interested in solar but just like listening to my voice, well, fantastic. Thank you for listening. So please do support me by subscribing. I'm trying to get to that 1,000 metric by the end of this year. That would be fantastic. Okay, well, that's it for today. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll catch you in the next video.